Israel and Iran are trading attacks today as this deadly conflict continues for a second week. Iranian military officials are vowing retaliation for U.S. strikes on their nuclear facilities. And Israel says it has hit the, quote, heart of Tehran in its latest round of strikes today. And that includes the Iranian Revolutionary Guard facilities and even the notorious Evin prison in Tehran. Joining us now for more is retired U.S. Army Brigadier General Steve Anderson. General, thanks so much for joining us. What's the significance of Israel, the Israeli military, targeting these specific sites?
Well, Wolf, what they're trying to do is obviously follow up on the success of Operation Midnight Hammer. They're trying to essentially build on that success and follow up with other additional strikes. They say they're a few days away from ending all their offensive operations against Iran. We shall see, but you need to follow up. Although President Trump was saying that these sites were completely obliterated, the nuclear capability is completely gone, that's probably not the case. And so the Israelis need to continue to leverage their air superiority, which they continue to enjoy, and take advantage of that and take out additional sites. When
you say the Israelis should do that, shouldn't the U.S. be doing that as well?
No, we should not. I think actually it was a mistake that we got involved with Operation Midnight Hammer in the first place, to tell you the truth.
Operation Midnight Hammer was the operation to destroy the 3 Iranian nuclear facilities.
Correct. It was a tremendous operational success, but I believe it's going to prove to be a strategic mistake.
Why?
Because now we've enraged 91 million people in Iran, and these people are not going to go away quietly. Now, there's many threats. We've got 46,000 troops overseas. We've got 3 carrier battle groups going to be out there. There's lots of asymmetric things that the Iranians can do. They can take out, they can do cyber warfare against us. They can exercise terrorist attacks. We talked about these sleeper cells coming alive here in the United States. And oh, by the way, they can take economic actions. They can close the Strait of Hormuz to oil traffic. So there's a lot that the Iranians can still do. The Israelis were winning this war. The United States did not need to get involved.
So what you're suggesting is that just the Israelis should have continued the military operations. The U.S. should have stayed behind the scenes.
That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Wolf. Now we have crossed a threshold. Now we have essentially enraged the Iranians. Now, we're the great Satan. We proved it. Now, again, a stunning military success. I mean, fantastic for everybody involved. They did a very difficult military operation. Oh, by the way, Operation Midnight Hammer is how you prove your military prowess, not a parade in downtown Washington, D.C., but that's another matter. But it was a great success. But, again, the enemy always has a vote, and I suspect that this day will come back to haunt us.
The advantage that the U.S. military had is that they have the B-2 bombers and those bunker-busting bombs. The Israelis don't have either.
That is true. However, they could have conducted some kind of a ground attack. They could have done some special forces.
That would have resulted in a lot of Israeli lives lost.
That is probably true. But again, now we've crossed a threshold. Now we've got the United States involved. Or maybe we could have used other means. There are other bombs that perhaps could have achieved the same success. Now, again, I don't want to take away from the great success of Operation Midnight Hammer. However, the Israelis were doing fine. They had air superiority. They could have continued to degrade the Iranian capability. All this time, the United States did not need to get involved in
Should the U.S. have provided Israel with those B-2 bombers and those bunker-busting bombs?
I would say probably not. They didn't need them. There are other bombs that they could have used that probably achieved the same success over time. To do a one and done is just, I believe that's not really possible. I mean, President Trump says the nuclear threat was been obliterated. I don't believe that. I think that time will prove that they still have, there's still 800 pounds of unaccounted 60% enriched uranium. That could very well have been moved to some mountainside or some cave on the other side of Iran right now, and that could be used to generate a nuclear bomb. And Lord help us what they could do with that. I mean, they could put it on a ship and sail it into the port of Bayonne. I mean, this is a potentially serious threat to the United States, and I'm afraid that we have enraged the Iranians, a very degraded Iranian, but nevertheless, there's no guarantee that we're going to be successful. And as we all know, there's no fanatic like a religious fanatic, and now we've enraged 91 million potentially religious fanatics.
This is what the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces chief, Eyal Zamir, says about Israel's continued strikes against Iran, and I'm quoting him now. We continue to increase the rate of our strikes in accordance with the operational plan, and we are prepared to continue for as long as necessary, end quote. Sources telling CNN that Israel thinks they can achieve their goals in Iran within a matter of days. That's what they're suggesting. How do you interpret that?
I think that they probably can. I mean, they probably can. I mean, they've been very successful in shutting down all the air defenses of Tehran and the Iranians. They don't really have a capability now to deliver, you know, a nuclear weapon, obviously. And they probably, their missile stockpile has been degraded significantly. Their leadership has been taken out. They continue to have intelligence dominance, which is extremely important. So I believe that the Israelis are probably close to ending direct offensive operations. But if you think that they're going to give up air superiority over the near term, you're sorely mistaken. They're going to take advantage of the fact that they've been able to shut down the Iranian Air Force and their air defense, and they're going to continue to leverage that.
Retired U.S. Army Brigadier General Steve Anderson, thanks very much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Wolf.
All right, coming up, Israel and Iran trading fresh strikes earlier this morning. As a spokesperson for the Iranian government tells CNN, negotiations, in his word, are meaningless unless Israel stops its attacks. So is there still a place for peace negotiations? Stay with us. We're back now with the latest breaking news on Israel and Iran. President Trump floating the idea of a possible regime change in Iran. Joining us now here in the Situation Room, CNN global affairs analyst Brett McGurk, the former Middle East and North Africa coordinator for the National Security Council. He's advised the last 4 U.S. presidents and has a lot of experience negotiating with Iranian officials. Brett, thanks very much for joining us. How likely you see the possibility of regime change in Iran?
I think, Wolf, we're not even 48 hours out from this historic military operation. We got to stay disciplined on what we're trying to do. And that is trying to ensure Iran cannot reconstitute its nuclear program. And right now we're in a very serious window of escalation. And so I think that talk is really not appropriate right now. Let's stay disciplined and focused. You know, think about where we are. We're kind of on the escalation ladder. So we did the strike the other night. The nomenclature that's kind of used is turn. We did turn one. That's turn one as you go up this ladder. We're now waiting to see what Iran does. We're using a lot of diplomacy and military maneuvers to deter any potential response. Hopefully they don't do anything. If they do something, we have then turn three, I'm sure probably ready to try to stop it there. But that's where we are. Very serious moment. So a lot of diplomacy going on behind the scenes, a lot of intelligence collection, a lot of military maneuvers to deter. We don't know what Iran is going to do. In the Qasem Soleimani strike that Trump did in early 2020, it took about 5 days for Iran to then launch a series of ballistic missiles at American positions in Iraq. Could be 5 days here, could be 2 days, we don't know. And we don't know what Iran's going to do. It's a very serious situation. I would say focus and disciplined on the objective, not trying to talk about regime change right now.
It sort of reminds me, I covered the first Gulf War when I was the Pentagon correspondent for CNN, and there was a build-up to the war. It was called Operation Desert Shield. But then it became Operation Desert Storm when the U.S. directly got involved in dealing with Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait. And sort of right now, we're moving from Desert Shield to Desert Storm in this situation. I don't know if you agree with me on that.
Avoid mission creep. I thought the White House, the administration, was very disciplined. This is about the nuclear facilities. It can stop here. And talking about regime change, first of all, strategy is such an overused word in this town, but strategy is about your ends and means. What are you trying to achieve? I think we can very much achieve ensuring Iran never has a nuclear weapon. We can degrade their missile program and system, which the Israelis are doing systematically. Trying to use American military force to effectuate regime change, that is fraught. That's an objective we really cannot, I think, achieve. We all hope for it. I hope this awful regime with American blood in its hands falls in the dustbin of history. I think inevitably the Iranian people will take care of that, but we should stay focused right now. Very serious 72 hours that we're in right now, and we need discipline and focus.
The head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, as you know, seems directly concerned about the whereabouts of Iran's nuclear materials. I want you to listen to what he said. Listen to this.
Iran has made no secret that they have protected this material. We need to ensure that we are not moving towards a situation where the unthinkable would happen, this being Iran going towards a nuclear weapon.
So, Brett, what do you think are the potential ramifications if some of Iran's stockpile of enriched uranium was in fact moved before these U.S. airstrikes?
Well, Wolf, this is why we need to remain focused on the task. The task that began the other night was a U.S. military operation focused on the nuclear program. Look, even if those stockpiles moved, I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect in working with the Israelis and Mossad over the years, they probably have a pretty good sense of where that material is. But the centrifuges that cascade, it's going to be very difficult for Iran to move into recreating and reconstituting that program. Because a key thing here, we never even assumed ever that Israel would effectively control the airspace over Iran. I mean, that is the situation now. That is going to maintain for the foreseeable future. So if Iran ever tries to reproduce centrifuges, reinstall cascades, I suspect that is something the Israelis will be prepared to take care of. But bottom line, right now, let's stay focused. Let's try to make sure that we don't expand the mission because this is not finished. And we're still waiting to see what Iran does. We have to try to deter them and also be ready to respond if they do have a counter.
Brett McGurk, always good to get your analysis. Thank you very much for coming in. Appreciate it very much. Coming up, attacks between Israel and Iran are escalating right now. President Trump is floating regime change. Iran is vowing revenge. So is diplomacy right now even still an option? The head of the United Nations nuclear watchdog admits he's not sure where Iran has stashed nearly 900 pounds of its enriched uranium. Rafael Grossi is calling on inspectors to safely return to the country and assess the situation. We're joined now by former Senior Director for Gulf Affairs over at the U.S. National Security Council, Kirsten Fotenrose. She's also a Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council here in Washington. Kirsten, thanks so much for joining us. How concerning is it that there potentially could be a stockpile of enriched uranium missing?
It's very concerning because this means that they could potentially move to a bomb 1 to 2 within a very short time period if they were successful in moving enriched material from Fordow before we struck the site. And what this means is that they could be much closer to being able to cause catastrophic destruction than we thought. For instance, there's a difference between a dirty bomb and a nuclear warhead. So you can take the fissile material, you can enrich, and you can create something that will cause havoc and mass death in a small location by simply dropping it out of an airplane or placing it there. So you could even smuggle into the US or into Europe, whereas it will take about 6 months to create a warhead that can be delivered on a missile that's very accurately guided, a lot more difficult. But that dirty bomb piece, all you need is that material.
If the Iranians were able to smuggle out and hide some enriched uranium, how would that impact their possibility of eventually developing and having a nuclear bomb?
Makes it much easy, much faster to actually creating that bomb. They would only need then help rebuilding some of their assembly plants and, for instance, their centrifuge production facilities. China might be willing to offer them that help. If they have the enriched material, that's the tough part. And that would be all it would take to restart, kind of like the sourdough bread seed.
You know, as everybody in the world is watching to see how Iran will eventually react to these U.S. strikes against these nuclear facilities in Iran, all eyes are on the Straits of Hormuz right now. What's your assessment? Do you think the Iranians would actually seek to shut down and destroy the Straits of Hormuz in order to prevent oil from moving through those straits?
Their parliament has already voted to require this. And whether that's just a statement, sort of a signaling, a message, some saber rattling, or whether they fully intend to do things like activate the Houthis or their own offensive capabilities to shut down the straits, it would be significant. About 20% of the nation's oil, the world's oil flows through there from many origin countries. So you wouldn't have to, if you're Iran, take out the oil facilities in Saudi or the UAE, for instance. You could simply shut down their ability to export. Wouldn't that
also be an economic disaster for the Iranians themselves, since that's where they ship their oil and they make money?
They do make money. They make quite a bit of their money. They have 85% of their economy is based on 2 facilities, Khajar and Bandar Abbas, where they export. But they do that for pennies on the dollar, and they do it to China. So if they think their economy is going to be undermined by the fact that we've struck their facilities anyway, and they know that we might come in and hit those export facilities in retaliation, they may just be saying, we're going all in. You know, we have to inflict some pain somewhere. That might be the easiest place to do it, where it attracts the world's attention.
You know, it's interesting. The Department of Homeland Security here in Washington is warning of a potential for cyber attacks and what they're calling lone wolf attacks from the Iranians here in the United States. What's your assessment of that?
Very likely. It's one of the easiest tools for them to use. We are essentially in a low-scale gray matter war with Iran all the time, a lot of it in covert and cyber kinds of spaces. They're good at this. I get targeted all the time by Charming Kitten, one of their many, many cyber teams. And they will be focusing on things like grids or water plants, who knows, banks. They'll be looking for things that will cause a domestic unrest, not in the streets, but requirements by the American people to ask the government to do something about this now, to distract the U.S. government from issues in the Middle East, from Iran, and force it to pay attention domestically to whatever the service provision that has gone down is.
So this thing could really explode even more big time in the coming days and weeks, right?
It could, because we don't know which asymmetric method they will use to retaliate. They have sworn to, but Iran is also always saying in any of these tit for tat or any of these escalation moments that they will respond in the time and place of their choosing. So it could be tomorrow, it could be a week, it could be months from now. We just don't know. And that's part of their power in this. They are so militarily disadvantaged, but they can say, we could hit you in Argentina. We could hit you at a community, a school somewhere. We could bring a dirty bomb to your own communities. We could hit you cyber on your grid infrastructure. So there are a lot of ways that they force us to then bolster our defenses, which is expensive and time consuming.
Excellent analysis. Kirsten Fountain-Rose, thank you very much for joining. Fountain-Rose, I should say, thanks very much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Good to have you here in the Situation Room. And just ahead, Iran's top diplomat is meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Could Russia get involved in this escalating conflict?